like a deja vu because for an Indian of my generation, you see Lipton tea, you see Tetley's, you see Cadbury, and of course the big thing is you're coming into a foreign country, but hey, I can read all the signs.
Vayu Naidu already felt a familiarity with the UK when she came from India. This is Writer's Mosaic, What We Leave We Carry, the series that tells the true life stories of migration to the UK.
I was born in Delhi, and it was New Delhi. I was born in a cantonment hospital, military hospital. My father was amongst the first batch of independent India's Indian Army. And he was from the south of India, Chennai, but he decided to join the Gurkha Rifles. And the regiment he joined was 11 Gurkha Rifles, which took him to the north and remained in India. There are certain Gurkha regiments that came over to England. He was also part of Madras Sappers, and the South Indian people or part of military regiments were called up north because in the partition uprisings, it was felt that non-partisan regional people of the new India would be better in bridging tensions. So I was born exactly 10 years after India's independence. And in that year, 1957, India became a sovereign democratic republic, secular republic. My parents had what would have been called a British education system, and in India we call it medium of instruction is English. Their teachers were Welsh. So interestingly, their English also has that kind of lit. And my father always had these remarkable memories of his headmaster. And interestingly, before my father died, he gave me a wonderful little school report of what his headmaster had written about him. And from that age of 12, you could see my father's sort of shaping, molding, emergence of character. My mother was one of the very few among her generation who was also educated in English. And they came from sort of middle class backgrounds, but not sort of too much inherited wealth or anything like that, just plain ordinary folk. But that generation, they were so idealistic of the new India. And there wasn't the kind of regionalism or insularity. They were really all, whatever regions they were from, whether it was Bengal or Punjab. I mean, Punjab had taken quite a lot of knocks through partition. Southerners were seen as not having experienced much, but there was a very strong independence movement in the south. And so west of India, everywhere, that was the generation who were building India. I have always felt this bicultural existence because my parents were totally Indian. So all the food habits, so what was home and what was the kitchen and what was your dining table, you still ate with your hands. But obviously when people were invited, suddenly the fork on the left and the knife on the right and all your manners came across in a different way. So you're always living this bicultural existence, particularly in the army. And that generation of Indian army is obviously groomed what are the British army etiquette. So I'm growing up in an India which is independent, that they have tried to bring forward for us. But there are still that residual colonial things that they cannot see, which are being infiltrated, I will say, into sort of my education. So I'm the youngest of four. My two brothers and my sister, they were in India, we call public school, which is state funded, unlike in England. And they went to public schools. My sister went to a convent. Um, I went to a convent, but then completely into a state education school, which was secular and didn't have the airs and graces of a public school. So I just got very interested in learning languages, Indian languages, and studying the texts in Indian. So there's this whole generational gap between, say, my eldest brother and me. So I'm really I'm the result of the new India and what it wants to put into its policies of being Indian, um, using public transport a lot more, um, speaking a lot more in local languages on the street. So when I was studying in, say, even though it was called St. Xavier's, Bombay, all the field work that we would do would be going into villages, foothills, village camps, you know. And one fantastic thing about my parents, I will always give them this: whatever that army sort of English moment of the new India was, they used to take us on pilgrimages throughout India. And I remember my mother always saying, "This is where you meet the real India." So you'd sit at these real ramshackle tin sheds out in the open, drink your tea in a clay cup, um, off a plantain leaf. You'll be having a dosa or something like that. And my father was a great communicator, even with the soldiers and things like that, with the sepoys. He had this thing with the pilgrims, because he used to speak at least three South Indian languages and two North Indian languages. So it was his thing of just finding out what's happening, in real. And that is such a residual memory, which is what possibly, I feel, influenced me to take on a PhD in the oral tradition. Obviously, this whole thing of socializing, the so-called, and how to dress. Um, okay, as an Indian, you have very coded dress patterns, what you'll do for a birth ceremony, death ceremony, we tend to wear white. So, engagement, marriage, births, birthday party. So, if you're doing this with your Indian relatives and friends, it's a different way of dressing up and celebrating. But if you're doing it within that army etiquette thing, it's what's the shades of the season, what are the pearls, what are your accessories, um, what time dinner served. You know, you're just constantly, you just immediately you're aware. To be honest with you, I suppose it took it led me easily into theatre. It was a great thing to dress up and just know the right thing to wear at the right time. I think it helped me a lot in Britain. Um, Although left to my own thing, I would just like one sort of robe, not a uniform, but just something that I don't have to fuss over. But it's just I just realized how people respond to what you're wearing, interestingly, and how you're being assessed. And not that I'm sort of, you don't have to wear brand names or anything, but it was there's an Indian sort of saying in our community that you don't dress up for yourself. It's the people who see you want to be lifted by somebody who's been washed clean and is smiling. As cousins, we were all brought up, the 18 of us together. My mother had five brothers, and women were whatever the position of a man, however strong he is, in an Indian household, all the cousins will go towards the mother's side. So, and then my grandmother was quite a matriarch. The seeing the Sunday matinee together as cousins was big. Guns of Navarone. And there was this kind of thing amongst my brothers, our cousin brothers, and there was a kind of an innocence about it. They really felt that they were fighting the war for the Allies. It was quite sweet. I mean, there's my father suffering away in Burma, again fighting for the Allies. But then, of course, you have the whole Mahatma Gandhi thing, which is, yes, go for the good cause, but then you have Janagana Mana. We're standing up in the cinema with our national flag. Tremendous sense of national, in being Indian, but also the excitement of getting a postcard from England with the Queen on the postage stamp. These constant, and the other thing about Cadbury's chocolate, that's English chocolate. My books in nursery were Radiant Reader, Pat can sing, and so that was what one would learn by rote. But the news, I wasn't aware of news as such, because I wanted quizzes. I never won anything, but just it was a way of knowing, and also a conversation piece, because these days you can say which film you've seen in theatre. Those days, if you went to either your army party or your English educated cousins, then that's what you talked about. Radio Ceylon quiz, Bone Vita quiz, World Service, what's the new thing? Britain was very much the direction, the director of what was to be aspired for that class of families. You preserved your English. You had, some people bandied about Shakespeare, but we didn't really have theatre of Shakespeare. For me, my great exposure was the Ram Leelas theatre there. But of course, there'd be people who'd be talking in high society about, oh, I just went for the season to London. That's what I saw. So yes, there was this sort of, wow, I hope one day I can go and I could really see Richard Burton, or, that kind of thing. So it was very aspirational. But it was also a fairy tale. So we're going on this country road. Those days, India didn't have motorways in that part. It's Karnataka, no highway, so no road lights, nothing. Suddenly we were going, and there was this sort of neon light kind of thing beyond some little mountain. I said, what's that? So he thought I wanted to go to the toilet, because that'd be open air. So I said, yeah, okay, stop. I'll open the car door. And he opened the car door, and I just walked up this mount. And in this little neon lit, it looked a bit like Close Encounters. This neon ground, there's 3 neon tube lights, what we call in India. 2 on the side, 1 on the thing. That's a stage. And there were 2 banana trees. That's the pillars. And on a platform was this storyteller. And he had wings with what we call, we used to have gold wrappers in toffee paper, or that had been stuck on, some were peeling off. And he had this big black makeup around his eyes. And then he took off his false mustache. And he had this wooden sword. And he was, reciting. I couldn't understand the Kannada, but I got flashes of this is Brahma, something. He was telling a mythological tale. And all along those mounds were people listening. So it's about 1 in the morning, dark night. All farmers, some mothers suckling their baby, some child will go, some drunk will be doing something else. So I slowly started working. In those days, we had those crazy Polaroid cameras, right? So I thought, oh, wow, I must just get a photograph of this. Even if it can't be used, at least I can show my editor that this is the territory for this kind of thing. So I walked up, crouched really by that sort of, and what's the stage? It's just kind of craters, barrels all stacked, and this guy is, he's got anklet bells, so he makes his own percussion, and his voice was just no mics that time. He's just reaching this kind of amphitheater kind of surrounding, and I waited, and he had just done that. I clicked, the flash went blue, and he said, "Hey!" Just like Shiva, and then I could just, he had his meditation, and that flash, and so on. I thought, wow, what an ability to come from, it's not scripted text. He's improvising, but he knows his material so unimaginably well that he's coming from mythologies and mountains he'd never seen to Shiva and the flash of lightning with that Polaroid. So, of course, I got a huge applause for doing nothing. In India, we had no drama courses. We only had a Delhi School of Film and Television. And nobody was wanting to take this on as a PhD research. I mean, I suppose they would have if it was possibly in a regional language, maybe, but it wasn't really on offer. And I thought, gosh, I want to do this thing on oral traditions, and I can't do it from where I'm located. So interestingly, at the University of Leeds, two very dear friends who were in the British Council at that time, they said, Wole Soyinka has established with Martin Banham the workshop theatre in the School of English in the University of Leeds. And of course, I had not now done anything academic for about 10 or 12 years, but I just had this strong desire. I've got to go and do this thing. And I'd done some regional language theatre. I had acted in Hindi. But this thing about what the storyteller does, becomes this bridge between mythological worlds, transposing contemporary reality, making sense of it, doing satire, commenting. I just thought it was such an extraordinary device, and I also wanted to extend how do these village groups survive, because it used to be customary pre-colonial. It was always the landlords who had to provide entertainment during festivals for all the peasants and the workers with a theatre, and quite often the storyteller would come. Temples had the storytellers, but television came, that took it away. So they were sort of financed, but what was happening once television had come, and I was curious how. And this was absolutely a situation where one guy, he's a traveling storyteller with his little theatre company, had an audience of about 2,000. And interestingly, then I discovered Peter Brook was doing Mahabharata, and it was coming to Glasgow for the culture capital thing. So it was an extraordinary moment. I managed to get my place at the University of Leeds. I arrived at Heathrow, and my very dear English friend, so she sort of picked me up, and I think her brother and her sister-in-law was staying near Central School of Speech and Drama. So I sort of stayed there, and I had this, it was like a deja vu, because for an Indian of my generation, you see Lipton tea, you see Tetley's, you see Cadbury, and of course the big thing is you're coming into a foreign country, but hey, I can read all the signs. I have a rubbish sense of direction, and it always gets, but at least I could read the signs, So, and then it was funny because again, through the British Council, I had met Carol Phillips in Chennai just before I was coming, and he said, do get in touch. It was very interesting. I always remember this thing he said to me. See, you've come here new, now mark everything that you find different. What's that freshness with which you can see? And I said, escalators, And he said, does it sort of unnerve you? I said, it does a bit, But the great comfort is everything is keep left. Then, of course, we have the Salman Rushdie satanic verses moment, and um, lot of tension. Lot of tension. I used to go to those schools. Of course, the teachers saying, "No, we don't discuss this," um, and the children have been on the Dewsbury marches. I'd be on this. I used to wear a sari a lot. I still do in the summer. They'd see me coming into school. Miss, are you Karachi Muslim or Bombay Muslim? So I'd say, I'm not Muslim. Can I come into your school? Then I was working through this thing. Gosh, this is the new Britain. Very, very different from what you're fed in from some other country thinking about Britain. And I was so glad actually I came because it was so you could just feel it in the air, anything could explode, and it was getting explosive because of literature. You could not buy your satanic verses on the counter. We were told, shh, directed downstairs by gesture in the basement. The satanic verses was wrapped in brown paper and put very discreetly in a bag, and only cash was accepted. It's with Rushdie you start realizing the impact and the status of what literature is, not even can be. Because even if something is misunderstood, the fact that it is a piece of literature has upset somebody who has authority in a community, and it filters across to all the people. So we are having 7-year-old children being taken on these marches by their fathers, dangling on their fathers' shoulders. So the real hurt is we as a community have been displaced by this person who is held in great esteem in this culture, in this writing. When I was studying in Bombay, I remember going in a bus, and there was this footpath seller of posters. There's Jimi Hendrix, there's Beatles, there's this, there's that, and this 19th century mystic called Ramakrishna. It's a very cheap paper. Like I said, it's a footpath calendar vendor, and he had this, the only one, of Sri Ramakrishna. And Ramakrishna is sitting there. He's sort of just wearing a dhoti and his cloth over his right shoulder. And the important thing is, when you see it in the actual photographs, he's got this inward gaze. And the inward gaze is the actual sum and substance of the philosophy, which is if you treat everything like an object, then it is separate from you. Actually, everything, this thing from which you see inside, that is the subject, and everything else is a projection of that. So when we go back to what we perceive about something, let's get a clear standpoint and clarity of what the thing is, not be distracted by our assumptions of what a thing is. So it's always connecting. So for me, he's my spiritual rock star. I love my husband, and I was very close friends with my mother-in-law, who's passed on. But they brought an England to me that was not the assumed England which I knew from India. They somehow especially the capability of listening that my husband also has through theatre and the other kind of volunteer work he does. I suppose that for me gave me a sense of a resting place. And it gave me the comfort, which was very, that sort of home comfort, not in material things, but that sense of understanding, which my parents could give me or my siblings, when you have that feeling of home. And also, because they're from Norfolk, so we used to go every time to Norfolk, and I just loved that landscape. I mean, it's bitter, it's cold, everything which is an antithesis to my sense of warmth, comfort, whatever. And of course, theatre brought it on. Theatre is a big marriage for us. And there's something about the marriage between, Britain and India. The domestic quarrel is the colonial moment. And you can actually talk about it. You can quarrel, you can argue, you can say 250 years, it's not you, but there is a cultural DNA. And it's this lack of understanding what your context, what context you'll have gone into. And, there's comical moments, there's huge comedy as well. But yes, that makes for a marriage of understanding. Before, if somebody has died, you don't ask somebody's permission to tell somebody else they've died. Maybe it's, even the fact that I'm stopping to say maybe one should ask, that is, I don't want to sound negative. It's not negative, but it's such a cultural thing. So in India, if somebody died, you will tell everybody who you have seen with that person, because the news has to go, because everybody goes and gives sympathy to the family or calls or WhatsApp or something. Here, you have to ask permission to find out if you can tell somebody who knew that person really well that somebody so close to them has died. And the moment I started clicking that in, I thought, I guess one has to understand privacy. As Indians, we are loud, we gesture, we certain things which would be considered completely full of bias or prejudice. Sometimes it's in the parlance, but it's not meant that way. All those sort of shackles move because we understand how we speak. We are on wavelength. In English, sometimes I have to explain. Like the other day, I said to a very dear friend of mine who's traveled with me to India and everything, I said, in a very Indian way, I said, gosh, you've lost so much weight. How fantastic you look. So somebody else standing there, another English acquaintance, said, gosh, that was quite rude, wasn't it? And I said, really? Oh, no, I'm just giving a real, I'm compliment. No, no, the thing is, did you mean she was so fat before? Something in England, if you really make that effort, you really can work on craft and integrity. I'm not saying in other places you can't, but you have to really start work at isolating yourself. Whereas here you can create your rhythm and your routine and responsibility in life, but carry on with your craft, and people will respect it in the sense of not be invasive. But people get offended in our culture if you say, excuse me, I've got work. Because they can't see work. And a book is a silent thing.
Vayu Naidu was talking to Colin Grant,